Without further ado, I will turn it over to our wonderful guest speakers to start their presentation.
Thank you so much, Jerry, for that wonderful introduction. We're getting our slides up. Give us a second. All right, so the title of our presentation is Incorporating Human-Wildlife Conflict into Integrated Pest Management. So as Jerry noted, we're with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the trustee agency in the state for fish and wildlife resource management. We're actually based, our programs are based in our wildlife branch's wildlife health laboratory. So Alex was very generous in allowing me to be introduced first, but really this has been his baby putting together this presentation. So he'll be doing the bulk of the speaking and presenting. And then Megan, we definitely undersold her contributions as our Human Dimensions of Wildlife Conservation Unit side. She supports the HD unit social science part and in particular our native wildlife rehabilitation program. So we have a really diverse and eclectic team and it's really quite wonderful. And then I cannot thank Mairan Smith enough. She is your all's unit wildlife biologist for San Francisco County in the Bay Delta region of our department. So we'll keep going. Next slide. All right, so we oversee our statewide human wildlife conflicts program. Currently, we have zero funding. We are hoping that changes with the May budget revised letter. Previously, we had a one-time strategic investment through a budget change proposal mandated by the legislature, which allowed us over the course of 3 years to really build out a robust program. And with that, we were able to hire on and cross-train regional conflict specialists to serve each county in each region of our department. So you can see that we have technically 7 regions, but the marine region, I mean, it's ocean. So we will focus on region 1 to the northern region. Region 2 is the north central region that has close to 17 counties, but it also has a couple of split counties with the Bay Delta region, which has a substantive number of human residents requiring response and service and support, as you all know. We also have our Central Region 4, which is originally where I came from when I joined the department from way out of state. And then the South Coast region, which has the highest number of people. It has LA County, San Diego County, Orange County, Ventura County. You get the picture. And then our inland desert region, geographically, is just so vast. It is gigantic. Lots of things going on there. So next slide, please. All right, I am going to now turn this over to Miss Mairan Smith, so that way she can introduce herself properly and then give an overview of the region that you all call home and San Francisco, the county that you guys work in.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name's Mairan. I cover San Mateo, San Francisco, and Marin counties. So within the Bay Delta region, the counties are divided between various unit biologists. I cover those 3 counties, and then I have colleagues that cover Santa Cruz, Santa Clara counties, Contra Costa, Alameda counties, Napa, Sonoma, Solano County, and Yolo and San Joaquin County. So our roles in those counties are to manage the CDFW-owned lands that are unstaffed. So we have wildlife areas and ecological reserves that don't have like full-time permanent staff. So for example, there's Knoxville Wildlife Area and Napa. For me, in San Francisco County, we don't have any lands, but we have the San Bruno Mountain Ecological Reserve, which is a small section of San Bruno Mountain. There's Tomales Bay Ecological Reserve in Marin. So I have a few properties spread out. And then we also handle a lot of the human wildlife conflict and kind of just, whatever else shows up that is connected to the department in those counties. And so that's kind of how it spreads out. But we do lots of various things. We'll get more into the human wildlife conflict, but I think that's our main office is in Fairfield. That's a great point. That's our main office number. If you have questions related just generally to the department, that's a really great place to call. We also have an email, the Ask BDR email I could put in the chat that you're welcome to reach out to as well. Yeah, I think those are the main things. And if you guys have more regional questions later, I can take them.
Thank you, Mairan. All right.
I'm just going to
So,
pause. I'm so sorry, Vicky. I just want to let you know that your camera's not on.
Okay, there we go. All right. Okay, perfect. So, Wildlife Health Laboratory, to go a little more into that. So our department's pretty diverse in scope as far as what programs we have. And so the department truly is broken up into divisions, regions, and branches. As I already indicated, we're in the wildlife branch that is under the Wildlife and Fisheries Division. The Wildlife Health Lab was established pursuant to Fish and Game Code section something, I think 1080. And we are required to perform throughout the state wildlife health and disease monitoring and surveillance. So that was the initial primary scope. We've since expanded since then. We actually changed our name 3 years ago-ish from the Wildlife Investigations Laboratory to the Wildlife Health Lab, more aligned with the One Health vision that really has guided the work that we've done as we've expanded. So we are based in Sacramento County in the Rancho Cordova office. We're right off the American River. It's very nice. We appreciate that. Our programs now run the gamut from, well, I guess backing up, we have 3 units or subunits within the Wildlife Health Lab. So I help oversee the Human Dimensions of Wildlife Conservation Unit. We also have our Wildlife Health and Investigations Unit and our Wildlife Genetics Research Unit. So that's a separate lab that is based in West Sacramento. So the sub-programs that we have, as we indicated before, is native wildlife rehabilitation with a real focus on animal welfare across all applicable scenarios that you can think of. So if we have to do wildlife captures, any sort of incident response, any response to public safety, captures and immobilizations. As you all know, relatively recently, you had this right in your own backyard / downtown here in San Francisco with the mountain lion. So we help and do our best to support our regions in any way that we can and ensuring that animal welfare is protected, human health and safety, etc. We also have our avian health investigations, which is one very dedicated avian health specialist, Krista Rogers, and one dedicated scientific aide, Jordan Langley. We have our big health programs that includes providing capture, specialty captures, including with the use of helicopters for pronghorn, bighorn, elk, deer, etc. Black bears fall within that big game designation or classification in the state. So all of that stuff. Already mentioned our HD unit, and then our large carnivore research program right now that has a core focus on mountain lions and gray wolves. And the wolf program for the state originally was in the Wildlife Health Lab. We were very lucky to be allocated funding through the legislature to establish a standalone position to coordinate that program, which was much needed. It was definitely the right direction to go. So that program now is elsewhere within the wildlife branch. And then we have our non-game investigations. As many of you folks know, coyotes are, as an example, are a non-game species. Beavers, even though they're a depredation species, they're non-game. All of those charming examples. And then again, our wildlife genetics research. So next slide, please. Okay, so am I handing this over to someone?
Sure, yeah, I can take it from that, and apologies, I'll be probably going on and off camera just because I only have one screen right now, and for trying to share the screen, and that it's sometimes a very unflattering camera angle from the camera. So but yeah, so my name is Alex Heeren. I'm the human wildlife conflict, or sorry, human dimensions of wildlife conservation research scientist, but I also help out a lot with the human wildlife conflict program, as Vicky mentioned. That's a program that currently does not have funding or dedicated staff, so I help with that program as well, since a lot of human wildlife conflict is actually human and human conflict. So the of the sort of three larger programs that Vicky mentioned that are part of the Wildlife Health Laboratory, there's the conflicts program, which is sort of the umbrella program of 4 different programs. The first one being the Human Wildlife Conflicts Program. So since 2017, California has received over 60,000 reports of human and wildlife conflict. Again, that's just the reports that have been received by our department. We'll go into a little bit more detail later in this presentation, but we know that human wildlife conflict is, well, first of all, we will go in and sort of more define human wildlife conflict because it is quite varied, but it is also really underreported in California. A lot of reports don't actually ever make it to our department. So again, that 60,000 is as impressive as the number it is, and all the amount of staff time and resources it's taken to respond to those is only a fraction of the need and the amount of human wildlife conflict that's occurring in California. One thing I'd point out, and I think this is a really important part for IPM, is that nearly all conflicts can be prevented or avoided by adopting best management practices. So, I mean, obviously there's going to be a few conflicts that are just unavoidable. For example, the one that Vicky mentioned is the mountain lion in someone's backyard that Mairan helped to respond to. Sometimes animals just get wrong place, wrong time, and they need some help that there's not much to do, but a lot of conflict, loss of pets, wildlife getting into trash bins, etc., can be prevented by adopting best management practices, including those among the IPM. The human dimensions of wildlife conservation is again, a bit of a long title. So human dimensions is actually it's a now it's an international sort of field that has it's essentially wildlife biologists, wildlife conservationists that have been most of them have come from the wildlife conservation background, moving into the social sciences. Some are social scientists that have moved into the wildlife conservation, but essentially it's applying social science research methodologies to help manage and conserve wildlife populations. So I provide social science research support for CFW's conservation management work. We have 1 or 2 other research scientists in the department that do some human dimensions work. They are dedicated to specific projects. So I'm sort of the one that responds or helps out with all the other projects for the department, ranging from hunter satisfaction surveys, hunting and angler satisfaction, trying to retain and recruit hunters and anglers, as well as human wildlife conflict, visitation to some of our department lands, etc. Although we also have, of course, as Vicky mentioned, Meghan Kaff, and we also have another scientific aide named Taylor Duttrell, who are also really important to the program. And again, understanding how people perceive best practices is key to promoting such behaviors. IPM is definitely based in sort of the natural and conservation sciences and the exact methods to try to integrate the pest management and trying to use promote the use of non-lethal practices. However, at the root of it, it's a social science issue on whether or not people are adopting the practices, how they perceive the practices. It is really the key is human behavior. We have our native wildlife rehabilitation program, which Meghan will talk about a little bit how it pertains to your region. CFW, we don't actually conduct native wildlife rehabilitation efforts on our own. We're not a native wildlife rehabilitation facility. We do have some facilities to help or some resources to help animals for in the short term. For example, some of the if you've seen in the news, luckily not the last couple of years, for the wildfire impacts have been a little bit. We've gotten a little bit of a break between wildfires, with the exception of of course, the LA fires. But for example, bears that get burnt in the wildfires, they can come to our lab, and we have veterinarians to help treat the species. But the vast majority, and by that I mean like 99.999 repeating percent of wildlife rehabilitation is done by facilities that are not part of CFW. Our department and Dr. Heather Perry is the environmental scientist who oversees the native wildlife rehabilitation program, permits over 75 wildlife rehabilitation facilities across California. There is we recently did a rather large update to the regulations. That was over a 3-year process of a regulatory update. It's one of the largest that our department has been involved in. With that, we have sort of increased record keeping, and Vicky can correct me if I am wrong, but out of the 75 permanent facilities, we estimate we have, we're still getting some of our paperwork forms in, but approximately was it about 200 satellite facilities.
200 to 400.
200 to 400 satellite facilities, and approximately, I think we estimate about over 1,000 authorized persons who are sort of the tertiary level of wildlife rehabilitation. So again, a lot of folks. Given the new regulation update, we're still getting some of the data together to the permitting the prior to that regular update. Satellites and our authorized individuals did not have to be officially permitted, but now we have that paperwork in place to help sort of keep track and keep everything structured. And the reason why we're bringing it up here with IPM and human-wildlife conflict is that people often call rehabilitation facilities for advice on how to deal with pest species, and I put pest in quotations here just because it really is subjective. Oftentimes it's we know that the language in the past has been sort of nuisance animals or problem wildlife. We're trying to move away from that just because it's usually not it's almost never the animal's fault. I mean, sometimes occasionally, yes, there is an animal that is maybe assertively claiming a trash can or something like that, but most of the times it's the problem is that they're just doing what animals do, and it just is inconvenient for us humans or problematic for us humans. So again, permitted wildlife rehabilitation facilities tend to play a pretty big role with human-wildlife conflict, even in cases where it's not necessarily a rehabilitation effort. If they often get the calls from the public. We also have our large carnivore research program. The reason why sort of mentioning it today, we're not going to go into too much detail today, because part of from the occasional mountain lion that visits San Francisco, there's not a lot of large carnivores in terms of mountain lions, gray wolves, and even though I know black bears are technically omnivores, but they are also often placed in the carnivore just because they are rather large. But really, the public's perception of large carnivores influences how they perceive all wildlife. So again, perception of mountain lion taking livestock, or maybe a blackbird getting into someone's car or tent, whether camping in Yosemite, really sort of influences how they interact with wildlife after that experience. Large and meso carnivores, which are the medium-sized carnivores, such as coyotes and bobcats, really serve as an important control on rodents and small animals. So again, mountain lions like deer as their prey items, but they will also eat anything smaller, including rodents, coyotes, bobcats, particular, are really important for control of rodent populations in urban areas. So this one just wanted to introduce sort of the framing, the role of integrated pest management in reducing human and wildlife conflicts, but it also sort of really goes both ways that not only that integrated pest management can reduce the need for human wildlife conflict response, but human wildlife conflict response also really is influential for integrated pest management. It's really in some ways the two are really synonyms for the same thing. Same concept. So looking at the IPM decision hierarchy is avoiding, excluding, deterring, and then using non-lethal control, or oftentimes in the terms of for pest control, it's least toxic. However, in terms of wildlife, we sort of expanded it to non-lethal control as there's including trapping and other forms of take that would of lethal take. So for human wildlife conflict, avoiding would be removing attractants, removing food, excess pet food that may be attracting animals, really, and looking at it at an ecosystem base. So again, having if bird seed out there attracting small songbirds and rodents will then in turn attract coyotes and the larger animals. One of the again, as a tangent, people are often surprised to learn that birds make up. There's some studies have shown that birds are the second most common animal that coyotes eat. Bird seed, pet food that's left out for pets also attracts wildlife or rodents that will then attract wildlife. So again, there's really a chain reaction of attraction, whether it's from attracting rodents, which are the native species are considered wildlife in California, up to the larger or medium-sized forms of wildlife. Excluding, so fencing enclosures. This one is particularly important for domestic animals. For protecting domestic animals, based on the animals, the wildlife's behavior. For example, bears tend to be they are very large and strong. They are intelligent, but they are also easily swayed. That they're going to go for the least difficult route to gain food. So if it's I always tell people that they put up chicken wire to protect their chickens. The important thing to know about chicken wire is that it's very good at keeping chickens in. It's not good at keeping anything else out. So the bears will just go through chicken wire, grab it if it's easy. But if you put it up, if you make it a little bit stronger, it will do a good job of deterring bears. Mountain lions and bobcats are a little bit more difficult because again, they are intelligent, but also they are cats. If they have something that they want to do, they're probably going to figure out a way to do it. So again, more strong enclosures, putting animals in pens overnight are really sort of necessary for that. Having a free ranging poultry or livestock, goats or sheep in a fenced field may not be enough to protect them. And I know this is more in general. I know obviously San Francisco, you're not having your goats in the city or backyard chickens, but in general, again, keeping domestic animals indoors, pets indoors at night is really key. And then deterrence, again, based on the animal's biology and natural history. Most common form is motion detection lights. Most coyotes, bobcats, all those species, they are more nocturnal. They're not completely nocturnal. You will see them during the day, but they're really more comfortable at night. So again, having a bright light that will flash can deter them from entering in. Sometimes noises work. Again, the problem with noises is that they would also deter your neighbors and yourself if you have them playing a lot. So that sometimes that doesn't always work for folks. The other one that, especially for us humans, that we often don't think about just because of our own biology is smell. So bears, it's always hard to compare an animal's sense to humans, but based on the number of their anatomy of their noses and their brains and the nervous system, their we think that their sense of smell is hundreds of times better than a bloodhound. So again, they can detect a few molecules of a substance in the air. So again, bears are probably up there as the animals with the best sense of smell in California, but the other species, mountain lions, coyotes, are not far behind. So making sure that again, for avoiding attractants, making sure that things are wiped down, grills, stuff that might be smelling, fallen fruit that they could be attracting, but also sometimes placing like a rag of ammonia to try to mask smells or deter animals smelling. Again, emphasizing here that it's a sort of a rag with ammonia to produce the smell, or not. Some people have asked if they can put like essentially bleach in a spray bottle or super soaker and spray animals with it. That's not what we're talking about. It's not supposed to be used. It's supposed to have the smell to deter an animal, not actually spraying an animal with bleach or ammonia. And then so the last step is non-lethal control. And then the official term that we use in the department in the codes and regulations is hazing, which again, it's not the best term because it has connotations of college and frat houses and everything, but it's essentially the technical definition used in wildlife conservation is that hazing is an human effort to try to make the animal return to its natural behavior. So again, scaring it, looking big, scaring it off, trying to discourage it from approaching humans and adopting unnatural behaviors. So again, going into the next sort of some of the background of pesticide exposure in wildlife. Wildlife can be exposed to pesticides, and that can be either a lot of the talk is on rodenticides, but it can be really any form of pesticide or even herbicide, other substances. And again, here we're not trying to blame or say that rodenticides or pesticides should never be used. Again, really trying to promote an IPM approach that making sure that if they are needed, they are used in a safe manner, in a safe, responsible manner, and where they are not, where there could be other alternatives, adopting those alternatives. So pesticides can be, while it can be exposed to pesticides in a variety of methods, sometimes they can be direct. For wild pigs, other animals can directly get into bait stations or pesticides and just consume the pesticides that are meant for rodents or other animals. Rodents they're kind of in a unique category that they are. A lot of them are non-native species in California, but some of them there are native species of mice and rats too. Of course, some of them are even threatened or protected in California. They can be exposed directly to the pesticides, but also when they consume pesticides, and they can pass that on to larger animals. So coyotes who prey on the smaller species, even mountain lions tend to have high exposure rates of rodenticide when tested, because they are preying on the smaller animals and the animals in between. Another big one are, of course, birds of prey that are preying on rodents that can be exposed to pesticides. This is a report, and it's available on our website in much greater detail than the slide I'm showing here by Dr. Borbor, who's the pesticide coordinator in our wildlife health laboratory. Looking at exposure of pesticide in wildlife. This one is specifically ARs for anti-oncogenic rodenticides. Looking at these are samples of animals that are exposed, or sorry, animals that are carcasses are sent to our department for testing. you know, um, the blank, sort of the white circles are animals that were submitted to the department that were tested and were not found to have any rodenticide or of the ARs in there. The red ones are ones that were that they tested and found that they had been exposed to pesticides. However, it's not necessarily that the animal died because of that. It's not necessarily the cause of death. That is the yellow sort of the scary yellow triangles that are animals that have been tested and found to be exposed and deceased because of pesticides. We broke it up into Dr. Barber broke it up into raptors, so birds of prey, and non-game mammals. Again, these are much of the essentially excluding in this case deer and black bears. So it's focusing on mudlions, coyotes, bobcats, skunks, raccoons tend to be the most common non-game animals that are submitted to the department. And the Bay Area tends to have a given that there's a lot of people there tend to so again tend to have a lot of submissions partly because there's a lot of people, so more people are probably using pesticides, but also more people are also just there to submit carcasses to our department. So again, there is a response distribution in this as well. In the terms of wildlife, with the exception of rodenticides for in general, the use of chemicals to take wildlife, to kill wildlife, is not allowed in Fish and Game Code and Title 14. Again, rodents tend to be an exception to that, but for coyotes, bears, raccoons, they're not. The use of pesticides is not permitted. So we expanded this to also in terms of IPM to the use of lethal control, that which can be trapping or using a firearm to just take wildlife. Again, that's less of an issue in San Francisco because that's not going to be a thing that you can do there for discharging a firearm, but trapping tends to be another common form of lethal control in urban areas. One thing that we want to trapping as just the use of pesticides, we definitely want to acknowledge that sometimes it is necessary. It is, and when done legally and ethically, it's can be a property owner's legal right to set a trap. However, oftentimes if not done properly, it's not the most effective way of solving the problem, and it's seldom a long-term solution. It's sometimes necessary for a specific animal at a specific time and circumstance, but if you don't remove the root of the conflict, that issue is going to just occur again. For example, there's a lot of coyotes in California. If you remove one, it's family or neighbors are just going to move right in and continue to do what they were doing before the issue's resolved. So yeah. Oh, Vicky, do you want to?
Oh, just really quickly.
Yeah.
And then also chiming in on Alex's really great point. We always try to emphasize for RPs, so reporting parties, which includes but is not limited to property owners. It's not always feasible or appropriate to completely remove or eliminate an attractant, but you can potentially remove access to the attractant by that pest species. So what Alex was saying about like chicken coops, no one's saying you shouldn't have chickens in your backyard, or if you're a livestock producer, or you're a hobby farmer with small hoof stock, or you just have pets, and if you keep your cat indoors, which you should, but if you keep it indoors, it's prone to spraying, so you want to have an indoor-outdoor cat. No one's saying you can't do those things, but it is very important to recognize human behavior and responsibility and our role in mitigating conflict before it happens by, again, removing the access to the attractant. So that's a really key point. I know a lot of folks sometimes I think especially municipal partners or us as state or federal agency partners, sometimes our communication and our technical assistance can be, well, just get rid of XYZ. And that's not always appropriate. It's not always a reasonable recommendation. So we just want to emphasize that. And then we find that in that way, property owners are sometimes more responsive because we're acknowledging their lived experience and their own autonomy that, yes, they want to have these things that are in fact an attractant, but they can be empowered to take meaningful steps to prevent conflict and pest issues. So anyways, that's it.
And I'm going off for example, yeah, so these are the two slides on the left here are actually from the community college in Southern California that Vicky and I actually visited. It was after we were having a meeting like this about coyote issues, and they recommended to go check out this campus. When we went there, I was actually almost attacked by a squirrel because people people were feeding squirrels. Obviously, the trash is exposed. And in this case, they obviously tried to do the exclusion by putting up some wire to prevent animals from entering and exiting, but the animal was not deterred in this case, or maybe it had some help from a student, maybe I don't know. But obviously the animal still entering and leaving. The image on the bottom right is actually over by our office. The park was doing the right thing by having the wildlife resistant trash bins, but wildlife resistant trash bins don't work if people leave them open. So again, some of it is just again really again, oftentimes human behavior is not trying to blame people, but it's oftentimes the cause of the thing that needs to be addressed for IPM or human wildlife conflict to be resolved. So again, I know this being an IPM group that is sort of preaching to the choir, but providing non-lethal controls as an option to the toolbox, as well as lethal control when it is needed. So just want to give a brief background of human wildlife conflict in California, and before I jump into that too much, I want to talk a little bit about what we mean by human and wildlife conflict. It is quite a broad term. It can be anything from the most common things that people think about when they think about human wildlife conflict is, for example, one line maybe getting in and taking someone's goats or sheep, which is definitely a form of conflict. That's what we call depredation, which is property loss. It can also be a black bear entering into someone's vehicle, even though it doesn't result in the loss of livestock or domestic animals. It causes property damage and to the vehicle, which is also considered depredation. It can also be coyote getting into a trash bin, making a mess, wild turkey causing damage in landscaping. Both of those are, they're not causing necessarily permanent property damage or considerable property damage, but it is a form of conflict that people often report to the department. Sometimes conflict is not necessarily actual conflict. It's more almost perceived conflict. For example, a coyote approaching an individual. In some cases, that could be considered it could be a form of conflict if the coyote is showing non-natural behaviors, being aggressive. That would definitely be a human wildlife conflict concern. But other times, coyotes can approach a human that they are naturally curious animals, and the person maybe that's the first time they've ever seen coyote. They might feel threatened and report that to the department as conflict, which is again not trying to invalidate their experience. It's if they have a situation that they feel that is a concern, then we definitely want to hear about it. But again, not necessarily that all conflict is not necessarily all public safety. Is not necessarily always a risk or danger. Oftentimes it's again our human response, human behavior to as much as the wildlife response. We do also, our department also does take sightings. So people sometimes want to see an animal and they want to report to us for statistical purposes. That's we definitely appreciate that. But for the purposes of the data I'm going to show, I've removed the sightings from that just to show that the calls and reports that we get that are specific to either someone seeing a wild animal, being perceived that it's a threat or a danger, or a concern, animals getting into trash, causing a mess, or causing property damage. The one that I've not talked about is one in the rare incidents when an animal causes an injury to a human. Those are public safety incidents. They are definitely a form of human-wildlife conflict, but we do not get those reports. Our team does not get those reports. Those go directly to emergency services, the local emergency services, or our law enforcement division. They're the ones who handle public safety reports. So those aren't really included in this data, just because again it's public safety is really responded to differently than other forms of human-wildlife conflict. One thing I'd also want to mention is that often in this presentation and in our work at the department, we're often getting calls about issues of human-wildlife conflict where the wildlife is causing a conflict to the people. Another form of human-wildlife conflict is when humans cause issues towards wildlife, and those we don't get because the wildlife aren't able to report them to us, but they are definitely ones that we want to acknowledge. So again, wildlife vehicle collisions, that's definitely a form of conflict. It causes for both humans because it causes safety concerns as well as damage, but also impacts wildlife. Especially particularly for marine mammals. Sometimes there's conflict where people are approaching animals, getting too close on the beaches, causing animals to become stressed. So there's definitely the conflict can occur, impacts both human populations as well as wildlife. However, the department, our department is getting calls from people are only reporting causes of conflict that they feel need to be reported to the department as opposed to some of the other forms of conflict. So statewide, this is a map of all the calls that we've gotten since 2017. So you can see again, it's really clustered around where people are. There is sort of a gap in here in the Central Valley. Some of that is for the coastal ranges, but the one thing I'd want to also acknowledge again, because this is a human reporting behavior, it's our system is primarily in English, and it's often online or phone. So for again individuals who maybe are aware of the system to report or aware of who to report the conflict to, they're oftentimes reporting it to their local police departments, maybe animal control. If they are not particularly comfortable speaking in English, they're not necessarily going to be reporting it to our department. So again, that gap is the gaps here are not necessarily to indicate that there's not human-wildlife conflict occurring. It's indicating that there's not human-wildlife conflict reports that our department is receiving. The most common report that we get from the public are about black bears, followed by mountain lions and wild pig. Again, those I would say that while deer is a little bit lower than the list, overall probably deer conflict is much higher because there's deer getting into people's gardens and landscaping all the time. It's just not something that's reported to our department. Likewise, you see that here that raccoon and possums and skunks don't make the list of the top species that we get reports of. However, those animals are in urban areas. People encounter them all the time. It's likely that there is they are probably the most common forms of human-wildlife conflict in the state. They're just not the ones to report to us. Oftentimes they're going to be reported to local animal control. It's more that if you see a bear, you're probably going to report it to CDFW. Whereas if you encounter a possum, you're probably going to either resolve it yourself or go to animal control. So again, there's definitely, I want to acknowledge that there's a lot of work being done not only in CFW, but also with our partner agencies across the state for human-wildlife conflict, and we're only getting a subset of the data. So moving on, and again, Mairan or Vicky or Megan, feel free to add anything to this. Mairan particularly knows this region much better than I do, since it's her region. Looking at human-wildlife conflict reports for our Bay Delta region. So these are the counties that are focused in the Bay Area for Region 3. As I mentioned on the previous slide, it's geographically the smallest of our regions, but it's the second largest in terms of population. So it's really densely populated, a lot of people. So a lot of it's also as you all know, Bay Area is a really wonderful mix of urban areas as well as sort of interspaced with really sort of wild areas. So a lot of opportunities for people to encounter wildlife, which is fantastic. Most of those encounters are constructive and positive, but it also leads the opportunity for problems to occur. The reports that we get the most often from the department standpoint are wild pig in this area. Again, I think San Francisco is I believe the only county in California where wild pigs aren't found. So you guys are unique in that. They would not probably do well. I mean, maybe they could probably live in the Golden Gate Park, but not the best habitat for them. But I do know that outside of the direct San Francisco, the wild pigs are an issue. They are along some throughout the East Bay, as well as up into even the Hetch Hetchy, where I know San Francisco gets a lot of its most of its water from, can have issues with wild pigs. So again, not necessarily a concern of in the city itself, but in the surrounding communities. And as IPM professionals, I'm sure you folks are called throughout the area that may have some of these concerns. Coyote is the second most common report that we received through this through our call logs or through our online system. Followed by mudline. Again, mudlines are really going to the type of conflict is really going to be determined by where you are in this region. In San Francisco, it's probably going to be if there's an issue with the mudline, it's probably going to be an animal welfare issue where the mudline is just stuck where it shouldn't be and needs some help getting it out to a more suitable habitat. But in the broader sort of more rural or ex-urban areas of Region 3, livestock depredation or loss of livestock is a pretty common experience with mudline conflict. Region 3 is fairly unique in the state for wild turkey damage or wild turkey conflict. The turkeys tend to be fairly aggressive and they do make a mess, and they can damage vehicles as well as enter buildings, enter homes, and cause some concerns. And then followed sort of more of the deer, but also what some folks consider call it sort of like backyard wildlife, the raccoons, bobcats, species that can sort of live in urban areas and folks' backyards that well suited to the cities. Beaver, again, not so much in San Francisco, but in the greater Region 3 area, and I know Alameda, I believe, and more in the Delta definitely has a lot of issues with beaver. Beaver tend to cause sometimes damages with them chewing on structures or chewing on fruit trees. But the biggest common cases of conflict with beavers is, especially in the Delta area, is that their water engineering skills tend to compete with our water engineering skills. So they build dams, block canals, culverts, and that's really sort of the source of conflict with beavers in this area. And then Following down, there's sort of a range of assorted species. Black bear, again, region 3 is tends to be unique in the area that this is not the best, most common habitat for black bears. A little bit up in Sonoma and up here in the more of the northern coast, you encounter more bears. But sorry, go ahead, Mairan. Yeah.
I was just gonna say that we do get Marin bears, and last summer there was a bear that was coming into Marin neighborhoods and getting into bird feeders. So, and they come down into Solano County, and are sighted in Fairfield and stuff like that. So they are around for sure.
They're
But yeah,
around.
mostly Napa Sonoma.
And then going on, so just narrowing in on the city and county itself. So again, the two takeaways I want to point out from this slide is, just looking at the map, it looks like there's not as many points. And again, really emphasizing that these are points that we've gotten through our online system for mapping purposes. A lot of the calls we get come in as phone calls. They don't have coordinates, so can't put them on the map. And also, San Francisco Animal Control often is the agency that gets a lot of these reports. So again, this is not to imply that there's not human-wild conflicts occurring in San Francisco. It's just saying that our department are not receiving, is oftentimes not receiving the reports directly. They're coming in through other means, other agencies. The other point I wanted to make, again, San Francisco is unique for a lot of reasons. There is obviously a natural barrier for wildlife around with the bay here on 3 sides, but generally wildlife don't observe barriers, man-made barriers, since so city line, county lines, they will cross those. No problem. The bay obviously does deter some species, but not all. You can see that there are. We do get reports on islands as well. So again, the human man-made barriers or boundaries aren't necessarily observed. So it's really needs a really more of a collaborative and integrative approach to response. Looking at the most common report, again, that the department receives are about coyotes and raccoons, followed by mountain lions. Again, in the city and county itself, these are animal welfare issues. So a mountain lion that is just in a place where it's probably not should be, needs help some out to a more wild area. And also, again, emphasize that coyote, it's not necessarily that they are causing damage. It's just that those are the species that are reported to the department. So they could be that someone saw coyotes and wanted to report it to the department because they had concerns. Oh yeah, Mairan, yeah.
I was just gonna also say, yeah, that sightings are a major report that we get, and that for mountain lions, sometimes it's not a mountain lion. A lot of times it's not a mountain lion. A lot of times it's a bobcat, or a house cat, or something else. So sometimes that's also what those are.
So wildlife as pest control, and I apologize, I'm trying to keep track of my time, so I know I'm running a little bit late, so I'm going to go through this a little bit quicker just so that we make sure we have time for the rest of the slides. But again, this is IPM professionals. Everyone is sort of familiar with this, that wildlife can serve as its own form of pest control. So coyotes, I've actually in meetings, I've been told by in Southern California, animal control is saying that at town hall meetings, people about coyote management, people are talking about if there were no coyotes, instead of having the town hall meetings about coyotes, we would be having it about rodents and hantavirus, because there would be without these natural controls, rodent populations would soar. Similar, so in urban areas, coyotes, raccoons will eat anything they can catch. So they also, raccoons coyotes are sort of the little apex predator in terms of rodents for on mammal side, but birds of prey are definitely another huge form of rodent control. So just going into a quick legal framework, I'll probably I'm always I'm a policy nerd, so I always, but I know other folks aren't, so this is probably not as interesting to others as it might be to me. So I'll go through this a little bit quicker, just so we can get into some of the other folks. We have within the California, so the way wildlife is managed in America is that for most species that are not federally protected and that don't cross state borders, the authority to regulate is given to individual states. So as Vicki mentioned, California Department of Fish and Wildlife is the public trust agency responsible for managing wildlife in California. At the state level, there are really two broad forms of codes and regulations. The first is the Fish and Game Code, and that is set by the state legislature through either through assembly or senate bills, or by voters through referendums or propositions. That writes the Fish and Game Code, and what it gets confusing is that Fish and Game Code gives the Fish and Game Commission the authority to write Title 14 of regulation. So it's a little bit weird that the Fish and Game Commission does not write Fish and Game Code. Just the from the naming convention, that makes it a little bit confusing. But Title 14 is the code of regulations for natural resources. So it includes both us, but also, wildlife, but also, state parks, CAL FIRE. So essentially, Fish and Game Code is sets out the broad scale of what the state needs to do for managing and conserving wildlife. Fish and Game Commission then adopts the regulations to carry out the Fish and Game Code. And then the CFW, our department, is in charge of enforcing and carrying out both the Fish and Game Code, but also Title 14 Code of Regulations. So we sometimes we get angry hunters at our front desk, or other angry landowners asking why we made such and such rule. In our case, CFW, we don't actually write the rules. We just carry them out. It's we can definitely assist in providing technical expertise to the Fish and Game Commission in writing regulations, but they are not something that we write directly. In terms of IPM, another big player is Department of Pesticide Regulation, and they are there's a whole separate code, of course, for as you're all aware, for whole separate title of both code, but also title of California regulations regarding pesticide use. So just a quick overview on California Fish and Game Code, is adopted by the California legislature. Title 14 of the California Code of Regulations is adopted by the Fish and Game Commission. It provides direction on how the Fish and Game Code should be implemented. Throughout that, for human wildlife conflict, there's a few different sections that directly relate to codes and regulations to directly relate to human wildlife conflict. One is depredation. Again, depredation is any form of wildlife or any form of property damage caused by wildlife. So it can be loss of domestic animals, which as a cat owner, we all of course consider our pets family members, but in terms of law, they're considered domestic animals are considered property. So it can be pets, loss of livestock, but also damage to structures. They're getting into a house or vehicle, or for example, a wild turkey causing landscape damage. The landscape, shrubbery and trees are a form of property. In California, any species can cause property damage, but there's only a certain number of species that require a depredation permit to take, and those are beaver, black bear, bobcat, deer, elk, gray squirrel, mountain lion, wild pig, and wild turkey. So essentially, mostly the larger animals, as well as animals that are either considered a game species or at one point considered a game species, need a permit in lieu of a hunting license to take. That being said, species that are in the list. Some of those can be taken at any time for property damage. For example, coyotes are not a species that require a depredation permit, so they can be taken without a depredation permit. But other species are have other protections, so federal protections such as the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, that prohibit the taking, or endangered species such as the San Joaquin kit fox, and the other one that I know is a big species or big taxonomic group in San Francisco that does have human-wildlife conflict are marine mammals. So marine mammals are actually overseen by the federal government, the National Ocean and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. So we can help advise and provide guidance on that, but any issues with marine mammals have to be taken up with the federal government. Use of traps, which is again a longer section. We can answer questions about it if folks have it, or you can contact either Mairan or myself later on if you have questions about using traps. These are larger traps, so not mouse traps, not traps that are generally for mice, rats, gophers. These are the larger cage traps for raccoons, possum, skunks. There's a variety of different laws of how they can be used, but the big one is that they must be checked once a day, and any animals that are caught have to be either released or dispatched. So again, if we have folks asking, they want to set a trap for maybe a raccoon that keeps showing up on the property, and they want to trap it and then take it somewhere else and re-release it. So that is not allowed. In the case of IPM and human conflict, if someone brought that to you, the best approach would be to provide them advice on how to maybe deter the animal from coming around, or even just manage expectations. An animal being on someone's property is not in itself a problem. If it is causing a problem, how can we help that landowner prevent conflict? And if they really want to do, if it turns out that trapping is the route that needs to happen, it has to. Unfortunately, they have to humanely euthanize that animal if they catch it. So again, they have to be prepared to do that if they want to go that route. And harassment of wildlife. So again, it often gets confused with hazing of wildlife. So it's a little bit weird. So essentially, hazing is good, harassment is bad in terms of our regulations. Harassment is we don't actually have a specific code or regulation that prohibits the feeding of wildlife, but the harassment is considered anything that is that alters their natural behavior. So in this example, if you're feeding wildlife, that's altering their natural behavior, and that is considered harassment. And again, as I'm a bird lover, I do have bird feeders. Since technically bird feeders don't alter their natural behavior of the birds, they don't that's why they're not considered harassment. But again, bird feeding can be lead source of conflict. So and then we also have our Fish and Game Commission has a terrestrial predator policy, which is acknowledging that native terrestrial predators are an important part of the California's ecosystem and culture, but really emphasizing that a wide variety of tools should be used to respond to them, including lethal control, but as well as non-lethal controls. And again, really getting at sort of the heart of this, the concept of IPM is using a diverse set of tools to avoid, reduce, and manage conflict. So just going to go briefly through some of the best practices that for the species that are most commonly reported to us in San Francisco. And again, Mairan, Vicky, or Megan, feel free to provide any additional best practices or feedback if you have it. But coyotes, again, for coyotes, a lot of it is actually managing expectations. A lot of times we get reports of someone reporting that they saw a coyote in their neighborhood and they want it removed. So again, responding to them that just a sighting of coyote in and of itself is not necessarily a concern. Coyotes are a native species to California. They do very well in urban areas. So again, trying to help people identify when they need to be concerned versus when they can sort of enjoy seeing wildlife in their neighborhoods. But removing attractants, including bird feeders. Again, I know folks, myself included, get sensitive about being told whether or not they can have bird feeders, but sometimes if it's causing a problem, it's good to take it down for a while. Let the birds will come back, but it can give the other wildlife a time to sort of move on and find different better sources of food. Fallen fruit, coyotes, even though they are carnivores, they really are more omnivores. They'll eat anything. Fallen fruit, it's in particular something that they will eat. Pet food, whether that is people leaving pet food out and animals, skunks and raccoons and coyotes coming to it. As an aside, we get reports of people leaving pet food out and then enjoying that coyote, or the sending pictures about the raccoons that come and eat out of it. Raccoons and other animals have a lot of different diseases that you probably don't want your pets to have. So it's good to, from both your pet's sake and wildlife, to not leave pet food out overnight unguarded or unsupervised, as well as trash. If I know in some neighborhoods it's unavoidable that you have to take the trash out at certain times. There's not really a way to keep it indoors, but at when, if it's causing an issue, to try to only bring it out when what's necessary for pickup, or making sure that it's secured. We got a lot of images of people saying that they secured their trash by they put a log or a rock on top of it, or put a bungee cord on it. That does not really work for anything larger than maybe squirrels. So coyotes, bears particularly, they will, you need a little bit more than a bungee cord or something weighing down to have it secured. Again, if you get calls or reports about asking people about feeding coyotes, reemphasize that it's not legal and it's also not healthy for the animals. It's can expose them to different diseases when they congregate in an area. Also, usually the food that are being fed to coyotes and other animals is not really healthy food. It's usually, to them, it's junk food. And again, manage expectations. Many reported conflicts are actually perceived conflicts. Again, not trying to invalidate anyone's experiences or take anyone's concerns not seriously, but sometimes you can help them reframe the experience to a more positive light. Another, and I know this is an issue that Mairan and others have get quite a bit in the Bay Area, are coyotes and mange. Unfortunately, there's mange in coyotes is very difficult to address. They are very sensitive to mange. They may look, well, they often do look awful and in pain or uncomfortable, but they are they can still be very mobile. And a coyote mange is very difficult to trap because they are wary of traps, especially when they are already in the compromised state. They get, it just adds another stress to them, so they avoid traps. So unfortunately, there's not a lot that can be done for coyotes with mange. If a coyote with mange is not mobile, you can contact a wildlife rehabilitation facility, and we'll talk about that in a bit. Unfortunately, by the time it gets in that state, probably the best route is going to be humane euthanasia, but for animal welfare concerns, there are some treatments available that can be done within a wildlife rehab facility, but again, it's not really, it's rather difficult to capture a coyote with a mange. So the big thing is to try to avoid the spread of mange, is to remove attractants to prevent coyotes from congregating and spreading the disease. They are pack animals. They have family units. So one coyote that gets exposed can spread mange to its family members. So again, trying to keep things not having artificial feeding sites, keeping their feeding sites hygienic, just so that the disease doesn't limits the spread. For raccoons, opossums, skunks, again, the big one is removing attractants, pet food, secured trash containers, and then if it's animals that are injured or orphaned, contacting a wildlife rehabilitation facility. I would also, again, emphasize that this one is another one where the perceived conflicts can be important to address. Oftentimes people would, having an animal, obviously don't want and raccoon in someone's attic, but having a raccoon nesting in someone's tree or other areas, that may not be an issue. So just because an animal has a den in someone's property, it may not necessarily mean is that an actual conflict. Oftentimes, animals have to live somewhere. Again, removing attractants, raccoons and skunks in particular have different species of roundworm that is quite not good for anyone else or for them. So you don't want people, you want to get it exposed to yourself, but you also don't want your pets to be exposed to. So again, another reason to make sure that water containers or for water receptacles and food receptacles for pets are not just left out. Mountain lions, again, sort of emphasize that in the city itself, it's probably going to be more of an animal welfare issue. So in that case, Mairan, contact local emergency, 911 or whatever, just to, they'll be the easiest one to help get into contact. That in that case, that usually the animal needs some help getting back to where it needs to be. Outside of the urban areas, again, for folks who are maybe in other parts of the Bay Area, keeping domestic animals indoors for pets, and at night secured for goats and sheep is important. Birds, so birds can also be most birds are federally protected, so that you prevents and obviously for purposes of IPM, we don't want to be killing them anyway. But the big one is discouraging the feeding of ducks, geese, and gulls. I know that's definitely a challenge in San Francisco, just because there's so many tourists that come, and tourists either accidentally or on purpose drop food to feed the animals. The big one is, again, discouraging the feeding of ducks, geese, and gulls. And I know this is a little bit, again, limited in the city because just real estate and space is limited. But if you do have pools or ponds in the spring, it's going to provide a small little ramp. They do make inflatable ramps, but you can also just put a board or a rock down for ducklings to get out of the pond. Sometimes when they're young, the ducklings will follow their mother into a pond or pool, but then they can't get out. So again, providing that access so that they can get out of the pool is important. And then if you have concerns about an animal that you've found, contact a rehabilitation facility and they can advise. Sometimes we get a lot of folks who call about orphan birds. They're sort of that old myth that once you touch a baby bird, the parents won't take it. That is a myth for the most part. I mean, for some species, it's probably true, but in generally, it is possible or feasible to re-nest a bird when it falls out of a nest. But again, and if you are unsure, or if the public is unsure, have them contact a rehabilitation facility, and they can advise based on the species and situation. For birds, there are some cases where maybe a permit is needed. In most cases, that's going to be a federal permit for eggs, rooming of nest. For, again, a lot of these are for airports that need that. Obviously can't have geese flying on the runways or nesting on the runways. So for most private individuals, residential, again, this I think is an important one, that just because there's a duck or goose nesting in someone's property, usually in those cases, the best advice is to just advise them to give them that nest space. They grow up very quickly. They will grow up going their way. So removing the nest is not a humane option in nearly all cases. Best friends, and I know definitely I've seen the news about chunkers, the sea lion. Definitely can cause issues and concerns, but they are federally protected. So you can always reach out to CFW. We can help advise and put you in contact with the correct agency to address these issues. But again, for most cases, for marine mammals, the key best practice is enjoying them from a respectful distance. Next, and again, I know, so I'm running a little bit late, but I just want to go very briefly over our human-wildlife conflict toolkit to identify some of the different resources our department has. So if you search wildlife.ca.gov/HWC, this will bring you to this page. We list out some of our laws and regulations that I've sort of briefly covered, but we also have a set of species or taxa specific tools for responding to commonly asked questions, as well as best practices for individual species. We're constantly updating this, so always we encourage folks to check back again. We keep adding in new information as we find it, providing preventing conflicts, providing tips for outdoor safety, and as well as additional resources. We also have our wildlife incident report reporting system, which is what I use to make the maps that you saw earlier. If you go to our website, you can submit a report through our WIR system. You provide information about your name, last name, phone. You have a list here. You can select the species. You can report sightings for statistical purposes, and then you can choose like whether it's like a concern about an animal causing property damage, or maybe an animal causing we don't like the term nuisance animal, but an animal causing nuisance in the sense of getting into trash or making a mess. You can report that here. That you can once you fill out that report, it will be routed to the local biologist, which is Mairan. She can review it, and then we're not able to respond to every single report, just given the quantity that we receive for example, for sightings and some of the other ones. But for other ones, we will review and reach out to provide advice or assistance as needed. Now I'm going to turn it over to Meghan Kaff, who's going to talk a little bit about our wildlife rehabilitation program.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to shortly reintroduce myself again. My name is Meghan Kaff. I'm a scientific aide here at the Wildlife Health Lab. I work with Alex to assist him with human dimensions work, but I also work underneath the Wildlife Rehabilitation Program. So I'm going to speak a little bit today about how wildlife rehabilitation ties into integrated pest management. So first off, the first thing that's important to know is when to contact a wildlife rehabilitation facility. So we would recommend to contact a rehabilitation facility if a wild animal appears to be sick, injured, or orphaned. And the key word here is contact. If you observe a sick, injured, or orphaned wildlife while you're out doing your work or just on the day-to-day, it's important to first contact a rehabilitation facility. Oftentimes, either if you observe an orphaned animal, it may have parents nearby, or sometimes wildlife rehabilitation facilities, especially during times like right now where it's baby season technically, so they're often very busy, they may be at capacity or refer you to another facility. So it's always important to contact them first to get next steps, and they will instruct you on what to do and how to handle the situation. Another thing that's important to note is that healthy wildlife that are causing property damage or are considered a nuisance or pest should not be taken to wildlife rehabilitation facilities. They already have a lot on their hands. They receive a lot of patience and care, so it's important to only be taking them sick, injured, or orphaned wildlife. And finally, another thing that's important to note when we're thinking about taking animals into these facilities is that the public has 24 hours to bring an animal into a permitted facility. And under our newly updated 679 regulations, all of you in the integrated pest management community would be considered members of the public. So this applies to you as well. If you observe an injured animal when you're out there doing your work, you also have 24 hours to bring that animal. If you have it in your possession, you have 24 hours to take it to a permitted facility. All right. And then moving on next, here is our website. Vicki, if you would mind, I sent you in Teams. My computer just died. I had links to our website, and so if you could, I just Teams messaged you right before my computer died.
Okay.
Sorry, everybody.
Mhm.
I meant to drop our link
Okay.
in the chat. But yeah, so here is our wildlife rehabilitation page on the CDFW website. This is what our homepage looks like, our landing page. And I'm just going to quickly review all of our, thank you, Vicki, all of our resources that we have here on the main page that you can navigate to. So here on the left, we have our facilities list, which is we have a text only option, which gives you a list of all of our permitted facilities in California. But we also have a new tool that Alex created, which is an ArcGIS dashboard that shows the facilities as a map viewer. So I also had the link to that as well. My apologies. You can navigate to it from the website link that Vicki dropped into the chat. But that's a great tool and resource. And next we have our laws and regulations page. That just gives an overview of the relevant laws and regulations. We just newly updated our 679 regulations, so you can find everything you need to know about that there. And then we also have a continuing education and resources page. This page offers a lot of resources, such as trainings, different relevant continuing education courses for wildlife rehabilitation, but they're also relevant for anybody who deals with wildlife in the day-to-day. So there's FEMA trainings and other relevant trainings that could be great resources for you all as well. And then finally, the last page we have linked here is the Wildlife Rehabilitation in Action. So that page just gives an overview of wildlife rehabilitation in California and ways to get involved or donate if you are interested in doing so. And here is our wildlife rehabilitation facility map viewer tool that I mentioned earlier. So you can navigate to that from our website. This is a great tool to either refer to yourself or refer members of the public who are calling you to ask about where to take animals if they observe anything that's sick, injured, or orphaned. This gives a great spatial overview of where our permitted facilities are located in California. And so it's really easy to just zoom in where you are on the map, and then you can see the permitted facilities around you and what's going to be closest to you. If you click on their little blue dot there on the map, it'll give you an overview of which species these facilities intake, and also it'll just give you their contact information. So if you're curious of who to call or where to take an animal, this is a great resource that either you can use or you can refer to clients or people who are asking you where to take sick, injured, or orphaned wildlife. So yeah, that's a great tool that's available. And you can also sort by county there as well on the left. So yeah, just a great resource that we have that you can navigate to from our website. And then finally, I'm just going to give a brief overview of which species and taxonomic groups are intaken to wildlife rehabilitators in your region. So Region 3, the Bay Area Delta region. So yeah, as you can see here in the blue, the taxonomic group that is taken into wildlife rehabilitation the most are birds. So the largest category out of the birds is the songbirds. So that's kind of interesting. And then next up, we have the mammals. They're in second place. They're in the green there. And you can see that rodents and squirrels are most taken into wildlife rehabilitation out of all the mammals. And then finally, that little tiny slice of the pie in the purple there are the 1%, the reptiles and amphibians that are intaken to wildlife rehabilitation in your area. So yeah, that's just a brief overview idea of what species are most commonly intaken. And yeah, that's all I've got for you guys today. So thank you so much. If you have any questions or anything, feel free to let me know. My email is megan.caff@wildlife.ca.gov. So thank you.
That's all we got, folks. Thank you so very